Welcome back to our next video lecture. This is lecture number 4 in our series on the Gilded Age. And today we're going to resume where we left off with the idea of oil and the gentleman most responsible for the oil business, John Rockefeller, whom you see in the upper left-hand side. You also see on the right-hand side an oil derrick with oil gushing, and then on the lower left you see an oil refinery operation. Somewhere in the time period of the Gilded Age, probably out in Ohio, where John Rockefeller was located, Cleveland, Ohio. You also see the idea of a trust, and John Rockefeller created the first trust, the Standard Oil Trust, which was nothing less than a collection of oil companies that he compelled to join him. That is, he sort of coerced the other independent refineries to join him and created one big mega or super refinery. And you see that pictured there by the octopus that has a rather angry looking face, and you can see an oil derrick right to the right of the octopus's right eye, the 8 tentacles grabbing up all the other oil refineries in existence. You also see, I think, the idea that we're going to broach next, which is what's the connection between big corporations and government. And you can see the White House in the lower left-hand side if you look very carefully. You can also see the Capitol building, the House, the Congress, in one of the octopus's tentacles on the left-hand side. So what we're going to see quickly discover is the idea of capitalism and democracy. Do they go together? And at times, yes, and at times we're going to see that big companies, corporations, wealthy businessmen are going to be able to buy influence with the government, and the government will then promote policies and laws that favor big business to the detriment of the public and the general welfare that government is supposed to protect and to promote. Anyway, that by way of introduction. Let's get back to the idea at hand here. Rockefeller really came into his own in the 1860s during the first oil boom in the United States. In fact, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, out in the western part of the state. There's a little town called Oil City, as a matter of fact, that I've been to, that used to be the capital of the oil industry in the world, really. So it's something that started in Pennsylvania. Very few people know that. Rockefeller set up shop in Cleveland, where there were a lot of refineries, and that's because Cleveland is along the lake, so you had water, easy access to water for transportation, rail networks, etc. And what Rockefeller did was he kind of studied the refining business. That is, you take this black stuff that comes out of the ground and you have to refine it. You have to transform it into something usable. And at the time they were making kerosene for lamps and lighting in the evenings. This is before electricity, our next topic. And Rockefeller really decided that, in fact, there were too many small-scale refineries operating and competing against one another. And though we think competition is a good thing in a free market economy, Rockefeller felt that it led to inefficiency and a lot of waste. And, so again, capitalism likes to produce efficiency. It likes to eliminate waste. So Rockefeller said, too many small refineries, too much waste. So Rockefeller then began to buy up the other companies and consolidate them under his control. And he did that by establishing his company called Standard Oil, a really original name, right? But the idea is rather interesting, that is the name itself, Standard Oil. And one of the ideas that came into vogue or into fashion during the Gilded Age and during the capitalist revolution was standardization. And we see this today. I mean, how many of us have iPhones? When we go to fast food, we think of McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. We think of hotel chains. We think of supermarkets. Everything in our economy today and in our market is kind of standardized. And really, this is Rockefeller's point, and he was the first one to promote and push for standardization. Standardization allows for efficiencies, and that allows for maximum profit. It also allows for easy recognition of a brand. And yes, people began to identify petroleum products such as kerosene with Rockefeller's brand. And here's how he did it. He created the 5-gallon can. He painted it red and put Standard Oil across it. So many of you may have lawnmowers, riding tractors, whatever at home. How many of you have a red can for gasoline storage? And that was Rockefeller's idea. So people could easily identify his oil products with the red can. And that's something that, again, the idea of standardization. Whoops. Come back here, Rockefeller. Okay. So, and Rockefeller was so successful that really in buying up all the smaller firms by the 1890s, historians estimate that he controlled 90%, that is 90% of all oil refining business in the United States. Now, let me move on to the next point. Like Carnegie, Rockefeller pioneered certain business practices. So he took the idea, again, that is really the trust. He said, look, I am going to buy up my competitors or force them to join my company. And that's what he did. And the way he did this was he was able to work with the railroads because, again, you have this stuff called petroleum and kerosene. He's in Cleveland, Ohio. You have to get this stuff, the product, out to people in their homes across the country. And to do that, you need to ship goods. Rockefeller understood quickly that if he worked with the railroads, promised them a certain volume of business, they would give him discounts or rebates. And so he was able to sell his product on the market for cheaper by working out these deals with the railroads that his competitors just couldn't do, didn't have the foresight to do. And so Rockefeller is able to then put together this massive trust, which is a legal entity too. That's another thing. So trusts, these corporations are legal entities that enjoy the protection of the laws and the courts, something that we'll see in subsequent studies and lectures. So Rockefeller's company then, Standard Oil, grew to include 40 separate refining operations. And what a trust is there's one board of trustees, that is a board of directors, that oversees the operations of the entire company. So there were some 40 companies controlled by a board of trustees. Rockefeller was on the board of trustees and kind of controlled it. So that's how it worked. Now, one might say, well, is this in keeping with the spirit of free market capitalism? And that's a great question. In fact, it seems to limit the idea of competition. The little guy gets squeezed out. Rockefeller is then able to control 90% of the market. Any of you who have played the game Monopoly know that's exactly what this is. So the idea of trust led to the appearance of monopolies in the American economy, and one might wonder whether that's in keeping with the values of free market capitalism or whether that is a corruption and a distortion of the free market economy. That's something we continue to discuss today. Microsoft, right? Do they have a monopoly on operating systems? And you can look at other industries as well. So, are there any questions about that? If not, we'll move from John Rockefeller and oil and his trusts to the next topic, which is electricity. And when we think about electricity, we think of Thomas Edison, who's pictured in the upper left. In the center, upper center, you see Thomas Edison's research laboratories at Menlo Park, New Jersey. Down below in the lower left, you see what is called a dynamo. And a dynamo is just a machine that spins around electric wires in a magnetic field that generates electricity. And you see what then Edison did with the electricity. He creates and perfects the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb, which was then in the upper right used to light cities. Whereas before this, we had lamps and candles. Now we're able to flip a switch and we have light. Something we really honestly take for granted, and why wouldn't we? We've all grown up in an age of electricity, myself included. So, but it really revolutionized, again, transformed society and life in America. And again, that's in keeping with the theme of the capitalist revolution, that it revolutionized and transformed. And what you see in the lower left is the product, or the fruit of Edison's work, and that is a company that still exists today. It's one of the major U.S. corporations, and that's called General Electric. And that was founded by J.P. Morgan and a financier named Villar. They took Edison's ideas and bought up some of Edison's generating plants and produced this on a large scale. And again, GE still exists today. Most of you probably have a GE appliance in your home or have had it at some point. So, Edison, he was, I'm sorry, get my notes in order here. He was extremely ambitious and driven by the idea of research, innovation, and technology. He perfected the incandescent light bulb in the late 1870s, and then quickly thereafter formed what was known as the Edison Electric Company to manufacture and sell light bulbs, which he did. Then, in the early 1880s, he began to understand that if you're going to have electric lights, you have to have a steady and reliable source of electricity. So he began to build power plants using the dynamo that you see see below. And in New York City in 1882, he built his first power plant that provided electricity to 85 buildings in the Wall Street district of the city. So you can see a shot of New York City in an artist rendition in the upper right, and that's what cities began to look like. And if you've ever been in a plane at night and flown over a city, you know what that looks like. So quite a startling advance at that time. Edison then quickly had a competitor, a man named George Westinghouse. He invented a new system of power generation that allowed electricity to be transmitted over longer distances. Edison's power plants could only transmit electricity in a radius of about a mile because he was using something known as direct current, DC. Westinghouse comes along and uses alternating current because he discovered you could transmit that over longer distances. And then I already mentioned that J.P. Morgan and Henry Villard bought up Edison's patents and formed this new company, General Electric, to both transmit electricity to people in offices and homes. And you're going to see the electrification of the United States occurring in the cities, and then spreading out to the suburbs, and then spreading out to the countryside. Now, again, I'd like to point out that these corporations that we've seen, whether they're Rockefeller's Trust, Carnegie Steel, the railroad corporations such as the Pennsylvania Railroad and GE, greatly contributed to the American economy in terms of its overall prosperity and the wealth of American society. In addition to that, it also improved the way of living. It improved people's day-to-day lifestyle, future innovations, and again, the light bulb. That's a tremendous advance. The railroads with their transport, steel with higher and bigger buildings in cities, as you can see. So together with the prosperity and wealth generated by the corporations and these new innovations and inventions, we can really see that the United States in the capitalist revolution period known as the Gilded Age enters the modern age, and we can begin to understand, we can begin to see how people lived. I mean, how we live today, and it's not all that different. I mean, prior to electricity and to all the other inventions, you can see that life would have been quite different, almost unrecognizable to us, and I think that's the point. And one last thing with the Gilded Age I'd like to touch on is the idea of selling goods. So all these things and products are being made, then what? Well, they have to be sold. So we look at sales and ads. And what you see here pictured are what are today we would call department stores. Well, that was another innovation, invention, creation of the Gilded Age. The appearance of really big stores. And in the upper left, you see Wanamaker's, a large multi-story building that was in Philadelphia in the 1870s. John Wanamaker produced this first department store. You also see Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, and Woolworths. So those are some of the big names in what we would call today retailing. Now, Sears and Montgomery Ward are interesting because they pioneered mail order catalogs. And if we think about Amazon, that's exactly what Amazon's doing today on the internet. Except then, no internet, they had the Postal Service. So people who didn't live in big cities or close to them could, in fact, enjoy the the vast array of products available and made available by the industrial advances through the mail order catalog. And you see Sears and Montgomery Ward. Wanamaker's and Woolworths, on the other hand, were actual physical brick-and-mortar stores where people could go. And the idea of a department store was to offer everything possible and imaginable under one roof and at fixed prices. Now again, this seems obvious to us, but before a department store, to buy and purchase all the things that one needed for daily existence, you had to go to a vast number of different stores. This took time, effort. When you got to stores, you would often have to bargain, haggle, negotiate with the store owner over prices. Department stores offer everything under one roof and at a fixed price, so it simplifies the experience. And not only that, but department stores try to make their shopping experience fun, lavish, glamorous, glitzy, etc. by creating these enormous palatial buildings. So it became an experience to go shopping. So with that, I will end, and please write down any questions. So the idea of sales, and then I guess the last thing I forgot to mention is advertising. So by 1900, companies are going to be spending upwards of $500 million on advertising to promote the sales and consumption of their products. Thanks, guys.